What are silly Lyney's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Lyney is a pyro DPS, and he definitely makes sure that you know that. He'll go now, disappear, as he utterly nukes your foes off of the face of this earth. His damage potential is by no means a joke. If you need a powerful DPS unit to do your bidding, then Lyney's a fantastic option. His ceiling is incredibly high thanks to how playing him well can yield so much extra damage out of his playstyle. He also has many teams which have varying degrees of difficulty to operate, with the harder ones being more rewarding damage-wise. I would say that at the very least, his damage is a notch above Hu Tao, and at his very best, he is slightly worse than Arlecchino, assuming C0R1 with similar resin investment. I'd say he comfortably sits as the second best pyro DPS on the whole, while being an S-tier damage dealer in general. Even at his very worst, you'll still get a solid amount of damage out of him. If you're in need of a wildly powerful pyro unit, then this silly little magician is absolutely a great unit to spend your pulls on. Another excellent quality when it comes to this master of sleight of hand is that his team options are quite flexible. Sure, Farina Vape is technically his best, but you have plenty of other options if that doesn't really take your fancy. There's his traditional mono pyro team, which works like a charm considering that's what Hoyoverse designed him around. Xiangling's AoE is really nice for this team, and you get to completely fill out his pyro passive. Really solid alternative that's a lot more stress-free compared to Farina Vape. Emily Burning pretty much just replaces Xiangling to allow for more team-wide damage, and overall it works, but I wouldn't pick it over the others personally. And if you feel like he's too fragile of a unit, shielding is always a viable option. Sure, he takes a hit to his damage, but his performance is still absolutely something to write home about. Not to mention how a lot of the teammates he demands are pretty commonly owned. Bennett is on a ton of banners, Xiangling is free, Farina has one of the highest ownership rates across all sites which record such data, and both Shilunen plus Kazuha are meta definers that plenty of people have. You should easily be able to form a Lyney team, and if you're somebody that's new to the game who has literally zero limited 5-star characters to pair the Magician with, simple. You can run a full 4-star team until you can snatch upgrades. Plus, a ton of people own Zhongli, so if you're willing to sacrifice his top potential damage for more comfort, he's an excellent option. Also, I make it sound way worse than it is. Sure, you're losing damage, but you're absolutely still clearing the abyss comfortably because of how much damage he's capable of doing. This next pro is incredibly subjective. Some people are going to hear this and think that I've gone mad, but I think that he is one of the most fun and rewarding playstyles in all of Genshin Impact. If you manage to learn how to play his best teams well, you'll feel exhilarated by how well he performs. I think the best way to describe him is that he's like what Child was back in Genshin 2.0, a mechanically demanding option who can be ridiculously strong if you learn how to use them. A closer comparison for his actual playstyle will be a more difficult to use Mualani. For the record, when speedrunning, the Shark Surfer is more difficult to use, but in their average teams, you'll find that Lyney is more difficult to use. Both are vape nukers, and I'd say that if you enjoy the Shark Surfer's playstyle, I don't see any reason as to why you'd not enjoy playing Lyney when we purely focus on how their kits feel to use. They also share a similar set of general pros and cons. Both feel absolutely excellent to play when they're put into their ideal scenarios, but feel kind of poo-poo pants when played in abysses that work against their kit or that require a ton of resets from them. I think Lyney's more reset heavy than Mualani, however. It's situation dependent, of course, as I'd say that needing to reset with the Magician is due to player fault, whereas sometimes with Mualani the game works against you, such as the enemy spawn locations or enemies moving in unpredictable ways. There is some genuine skill progression here. You might find that unappealing if you're more into simple playstyles that may have less skill progression in exchange for consistency and ease of use. If you're interested in a character who can shake things up a little and isn't super simple to play, then Lyney's a fantastic choice. He does ask you to be active as a player and use your gameplay skills, but if you're into that, then he offers such an experience in spades. He's got excellent Primogem-based investment too. He seriously wants a 5-star weapon in order to truly become a breakthrough unit, namely either Aqua Simulacra or a signature the First Great Magic, but you get the idea. A 5-star choice does a lot better over a 4-star on him. However, this is somewhat of a double-edged magic wand, because you could interpret that as his 4-star options not being great. The way I see it is that he's still a great unit on cheaper options, so getting a huge increase is a good thing. The same way that even though Prototype Ambro Nouvelette is drastically worse than his signature, he still crushes the Abyss in the blink of an eye. His C1 is also literally incredible. Increasing the amount of cat hats he fires is insane. His dolphin investment is seriously impressive, and the further you go up the constellation totem pole, the better. Plus, his teammates have really good comms too, such as our beloved Lady Farina and Shilonen. Essentially, there's a lot you can do with this fella over a long period of time. This next pro is kind of up in the air, and I seriously wouldn't pull Lyney over speculative thoughts, but I'd be surprised if Movu-Ika wasn't a huge buff to Lyney Mono Pyro teams and Lyney Vape teams, keeping him in S tier, if not even furthering his position there. She will probably end up removing Xiangling from Mono Pyro teams, and she may even replace Kazuha, making Lyney's new best-in-slot team Farina, Bennett, and Movu-Ika. This is all under the assumption that she'll be some freaking crazy attack percent buffer. For all we know, she could end up being a DPS, but I did think it'd be worth mentioning that he isn't falling off anytime soon, as I believe that Movu-Ika will upgrade his teams in one way or another. Plus, while I personally really like how his skill progression works, it's also his biggest flaw. The hugest turnoff when it comes to Lyney for most people is the fact that he's ridiculously high effort to play when you could play a much simpler unit and clear perhaps 20 to 30 seconds slower, which to most folks doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, a 36 star is a 36 star. The rewards don't change based on how quickly you clear it after all. So while he indeed is one of the most powerful DPSs in the game, he's gonna feel incredibly average for most people, whether that be because he feels a bit jank to play on any non-PC platform, or because his rotations require really accurate timings. He genuinely is not gonna be for a lot of people. I can yap all day long about how strong Lyney is, potentially, but who cares when the only people who can actually achieve said potential are perhaps less than 5 to 10% of the player base. If you're interested in Lyney because of how much I glaze him, make sure to do research into him as well. Figure out whether you're actually bothered to put up with a type of playstyle that he offers. Unfortunately, while he does indeed have a ridiculous amount of DPS potential, so few people are ever really going to achieve that, not only because he's relatively unpopular, so not a lot of people own him in the first place, but also because not many people are willing to go the extra kilometer to learn how this guy plays best, especially when he's so reset heavy and frustrating to use in abysses that don't favor him. It doesn't help that his competition is super dense too. I've already made a full video on the topic of comparing Arla with Lyney, but to put it simply, his dad is a better pyro DPS on average. Because Father is such a simple unit to play, most people will easily be able to fully utilize her kit. She boils down to simple normal attack spam, which is something that pretty much anybody can understand and make the most out of. Also, let's be real, she's a far more popular unit, way more people own her despite Lyney having had 2 banners, and more people are going to experience how strong she is. The only real reason to pick up a copy of Lyney if you already own the Magician's Dad is if you want to seriously min-max bosses, which, once again, there's a very small percentage of the player base who cares about doing that. Even so, he faces competition in other forms. Mualani is big competition against him in the vape nuking market, especially considering that the average player finds her far easier to play. There's also a variety of teammates that you can pair her with to make the gameplay experience feel easier while not sacrificing too much damage. For example, using Toma for shielding or Emily for multi-wave comfort. Yes, some of her most optimal rotations are kind of goofy, but she has much simpler alternatives. Lyney's alternatives aren't as simple as hers. Pyro DPSs in general are a very competitive market. We have so many in the game at this stage, and because the game is a couple of years old, I'd be surprised if someone who's played for over a year doesn't have a built Pyro DPS or 2. Obviously, Lyney is an upgrade over a lot of them, but I think most people would prefer to say for Movu-Ika or an Arlecchino rerun. His banner placement was seriously not kind to him, because even if I wave my arms around proclaiming him as one of Genshin's best, Neuvillette is the banner after him, and I think most people can universally agree that Mr. Settle Down is a top 3 unit. Sure, Lyney is indeed capable of doing some crazy things, but we have so many choices nowadays. Why would you want to deliberately go out of your way to choose arguably the most annoying to play one? For some, his playstyle will be exhilarating. I'd say that if you get the chance, try to borrow him from a friend to give him a real go, because I highly doubt that the Genshin trial for him is going to give you a real feel for the character. Your enjoyment of him scales and your enjoyment of his playstyle so hard. Really don't underestimate the importance of extensively trialing him. He's definitely not falling off anytime soon, and I fully expect Movu-Ika to keep the guy in S tier, but her release will also boost up the positions of some of his competitors, such as Mualani. I have great faith that she's gonna rise up to challenge the top echelon of DPSs once the Pyro Archon releases. I used to play Genshin on an iPad for a year before switching to PC when I started out, so I'm pretty aware of the mobile interface and what it's like. I I was also a C0 Hu Tao main back then, so I get the struggle, man. I would skip this dude if you're dealing with the mobile interface, plain and simple. I was able to make Tao work for me, sure, but I'd say on mobile it's easier to get her going compared to the Magician. It's actually not the charge shotting that's bad in my opinion, it's more so the movement. It's kinda clunky to move around and get your shots out while timing his vapes and rotations perfectly. I've heard that console players don't like him much either, but I can't speak on that a lot because I've only tried Genshin on the PS4 about 2 or 3 times. But from my experience, it's probably just because I wasn't used to the interface, but I definitely stick to simpler units on console such as Arlecchino, but that is literally just my skill issue from not having played Console Impact a whole lot. He feels really good to play on PC, but considering that a majority of Genshin players are on mobile devices, that's not gonna matter for a whole lot of you. Yippee for PC players though. Even so, he only gets worse and worse depending on how bad your device is. The worse your phone, tablet, or iPad runs, the less and less I recommend this guy. You're not gonna have the reaction time available to you to properly execute this guy's rotations. I'd recommend normal attack spam characters in your case, or units like Nouvelette who only demand the holding of one button. This especially applies if your Abyss enemies load in late. For the record, I think my favorite unit to play on mobile aside from Hu Tao because I'm nuts would be Xiao, aside from the obvious picks of Farina and Kanich. My preferences from PC to mobile differ a bit. When it comes to Lyney, it's completely fair if you don't care about him or don't enjoy his playstyle, but I find that he's oftentimes left out in a lot of S-tier DPS meta discussions, which is where I take issue. If we have no issue admitting that Mualani is good, then Lyney is good too, because the Shark Surfer is another vape nuker that has easier teams to play on average. It might seem like I'm the dude's #1 fan, but honestly, I just don't want Lyney fans to feel like their character is mid due to widespread opinion, when in reality, he can potentially be one of the best. I do think he's cool, but I'm a lot more into Venti, personally at least. I wouldn't recommend that a whole lot of you pull for Lyney. He's not gonna be that good for plenty of people, and Reset Impact is a horribly annoying game to play. What I really appreciate is that I'm seeing some of you acknowledge that he is a decent unit at the very least, even if you don't think he's S, which is all that really had to happen. If a Lyney fan thinks their main is bad, then spread the good news. Movu Ika's coming up and it'd be wise to save for her, but even so, remember not to totally overlook this neat fella's magical amount of potential. Hopefully this video was able to tell you Lyney's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and can someone explain to me why his sister's a cat but he isn't?